Hello, and welcome to the Global Slovakia podcast, where we explore Slovakia's past, present, and future. In this series, we look at the destinies of the brave Slovak men and women who dared or were forced to leave Slovakia in search of a better life abroad. Are you Slovak? Do you want to connect to your heritage? Follow us on Facebook or globalslovakia.com.
Hello, I'm your host, David Grega. Today, we are joined by Krysten and Michael Jenci to talk about their Slovak roots and share with us some moments from their fascinating story, From War to Peace, They Chose Happiness. Hello, Krysten and Michael. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, David. Lovely to be here.
Absolutely.
Michael, can you give us just a little overview of your family Slovak connection story?
Yeah. Here goes the beginning. My mother's mother, whose last name was Metro and her first name was Elizabeth, she came over in the turn of the century when she was only 11 years old. And she ended up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which had a section of Slovak people living there that came earlier. I heard that she came over with an aunt or someone, and that's where she had a place to stay. And I never found out why an 11-year-old would come over. And anyway, she stayed with them on Boston Avenue and Mill Hill Avenue. At 11 years old, she started working. She never went to school. And she met my grandfather, whose name was James Sinchak. And he came over on his own at an earlier time. So he met my grandmother, Elizabeth, when she was 16. And apparently they got married in 1905. And then she had my mother, Anna Jenci. And my grandfather, James, he actually evolved in some sort of a supervisory position. But at that time, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in the 30s and 40s, had a part of the mafia, believe it or not, that was hiding in Bridgeport. In those days, when you're dealing with people with a mindset of the mafia, where if you don't agree with me or we'll try to kill you. You know, it's a horrible man eat man kind of situation. He got into an argument with some of his employees. He got attacked and stabbed. He was able to come home, and my grandmother noticed that he was bleeding from the neck. And she had to walk him to Bridgeport Hospital, which was probably a mile away. And she actually saved his life.
Wow. Wow.
And so she decided at that time that she would prefer to go back to Slovakia because she thought it was unhealthy to be here. And she brought my mother and my uncle back to Slovakia and my grandfather. And he didn't like it, so he wanted to come back to the United States. But since World War I started, they wouldn't allow him to go back to the United States, so he ended up going back to Canada. And after the war, he went back to Slovakia, and he stayed there for several years. And then he said he would try to come back to America, and it didn't work, so he went back to Canada. And Canada had a town in Toronto called Slovakville. He had that comfort of having a lot of Slovaks that were in that section of Toronto. And on my father's side, a grandfather who actually came to this country twice before in the turn of the century, around 1900. And he came over with he had a brother, but his name was peculiar because they just pronounced it phonetically. They didn't spell it right or anything. So they actually messed up his whole name. They spelled it the way it sounded, Jenci, and they pronounced it Yenche. Well, he's the one that got caught up when Austria-Hungary was fighting against Russia. But in the first battle against Russia, they ran out of bullets, so they all surrendered. And he's the one that ended up 6 years in Siberia. I don't know how the hell he made it back. And he showed up 3 years after the war was over. And he was able to get a compensation from the Czechoslovak government.
That is a fascinating beginning to your story. I wanted to get a little more information on, as a 2-year-old in 1939, after being born in Slovakia, you came over to the United States, and your mother and father had 7 children, correct?
Yeah. my mother kept popping out children, and she never went to the hospital with any of them. She actually had the baby in the bedroom, and in the afternoon she was making dinner. And it's amazing.
What kind of challenges did your parents face?
My mother had an aunt. Her mother's sister lived on the second floor of this cold water flat. They only had like one bathroom for both families, and there was no showers or anything like that. They didn't even have a place to wash your hands in the bathroom. Then they had a basement where my father went down there a lot of times to issue shoes with leather, and my mother, she was canning stuff. She would be preparing for the winter like they would do in Slovakia, because in the winter they had scarce food supply, and it was an automatic thing that you did.
Yeah, that is incredible.
I was on my own as a young kid, and I know my mother and father didn't want to leave me alone because my grandmother, she was older and she had a hard time going up and downstairs, so she could never check on me. So I would be on my own most of the time, even when I was 4 and 5 years old. Well, I used to go around finding pennies, and for 4 cents, I was able to really get an ice cream. And if I only had 3 cents, the Jewish guy would say to me, and here it is, for 3 years later, I still remember what he said to me. He said, "Gekaken me tere me blut, me shugi medel." He would tell me, "Go home and take a shit, you crazy kid," because I didn't have 4 cents. I needed another penny. And that was a crazy story, because for all those years, my mother and father were both working. My mother would still have children, and she would go right back to work. And she was the main support, because my father, who couldn't speak a word of English, got silicosis because the only job they had for him was working in a foundry. So then he got silicosis and he couldn't work until he got better. And the only way to get better was stay home. So he was the babysitter at the time. But at the same time, my mother, who's kind of clever, said that, "Why don't you go to night school?" So he went to night school at Harding High School, which was a mile or two away from where they lived in Arctic Street, and he learned to speak English. So he got a high school diploma, and then he was able to get better jobs.
Yeah, that is incredible. You had firsthand knowledge of the struggles that your parents went through. They also set an example of persistence. It sounds like that might have been something that carried you forward in your journey. You served in the military, you went to college, and you started your own family. I'd like to talk with Krysten, your daughter, who's with us. Krysten, your father passed down the Slovak heritage to you and your two sisters. Can you share with us a little bit about your experience?
Thanks so much, David, for asking the question. I'm just so honored to be here with my father on this podcast. It's really a joy. So thank you for making this possible. The thing I remember so vividly about my childhood is my father. He worked so very hard for us. He had 3 small kids and he was going to college. He worked unbelievable hours at a hospital and got a degree and got a great job and did an amazing job raising his family. But for his vacations, from all that exhausting work, drive 5 days across the country to visit my grandparents, his parents. I mean, can you imagine that? Driving 3 small children, 3,000 miles from California to Connecticut as a vacation. But I was so grateful for that experience and seeing my grandparents, meeting all my cousins and relatives. I will remember forever my grandmother padding around in the kitchen at 4 o'clock in the morning making poppy seed rolls. Just an incredible work ethic. She was raising her family, helping raising her kids, making baked goods for the church sale, participating in church activities. It was just amazing. Those are my most vivid recollections from childhood. I can't thank my father enough for those experiences and for making that drive so many times. As I got older, I just made me appreciate and respect my father and all that he went through. It's just so overwhelming for me to understand how easy my life has been compared to what his was.
Yes, yes. Obviously, it's an emotional thing just to even talk about it, because you realize the struggles that parents and grandparents had to overcome to keep you in connection with family. And I understand later on in the 90s, you actually went back to the village in Slovakia where your father was born. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I remember hearing so much about my father's trip to Czechoslovakia in 1979 when he went back. And I I studied international trade. I wanted to kind of understand the global atmosphere and just had it on my bucket list to get to Slovakia. And I wanted to do it before I had my own family. But to stand in the place where my father was born in Slovakia, in that small village of Slipkoca outside of Michalovce, it was just amazing. And the ability to meet his family, my grandmother's brother I talked to, my cousins, was such a warm welcome. Just a very powerful experience just to try to comprehend my father's journey and having so much respect for all that he accomplished and did in his life.
Yes, that must have been an incredible trip.
Yeah.
I wanted to check back with you, Michael, and see if there was anything else that you wanted to tell us.
My trip, when I went back, I had a very guttural feeling of my belonging in that place. Such a strange feeling, brings back unknown memories, and unknown memories is a funny way to put it, but it regurgitates something that happened in your life at a younger age that became a permanent part of you. Everything was so different, but there was a basic feeling of a place where I started on this planet, and I couldn't hardly speak because I would get tears in my eyes just thinking about the community that I grew into. Even though I wasn't aware of it, I was still building associations and experiences that lasted within me. And sometimes you get these feelings that you can't really express verbally, but you can express emotionally. And it was a very strange feeling to go back there. My grandmother was still alive. She was about 80 years old at the time, and she said she forgot how to speak English because she was there so long. So that was an amazing thing to see her. That was experiences that's hard to communicate, but you can sort of say words that indicate in part of your life.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It just gives you goosebumps when you think about the nostalgia and impact of standing in the village where you're from after all of those years of being away. That it must have been life-changing for you. We really appreciate you being our guest today, and we've enjoyed hearing your story and your connection to Slovakia. And Krysten, you're taking that and moving forward and keeping the Slovak tradition going with your family and with your daughters. I think that's just wonderful.
Thank you, David. I'm so excited about Global Slovakia and the Slovak Settlers Project. I'm just so thrilled to be a part of it. I'm so grateful to my father for everything he's done for us and for giving us his Slovak heritage and giving the gift that is knowing more about where we came from and all the great things that come from that country. I'm just so happy that we're all sharing our stories and learning from each other about this great Slovak journey that we're on.
Wonderful. Thank you both for being with us today. We'll see you next time.
It's very nice being on here.
Thanks, Dad.
Okay.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Global Slovakia podcast. Theme music was composed and performed by Zo Solar. Audio editor is Dea Partak. Global Slovakia is a non-for-profit organization founded and directed by Dr. Zuzana Pavlovic and Dr. Gabriela Beregaziova with the mission of sharing Slovakia with the world. If you like what you've heard, please donate at globalslovakia.com to help us continue to make this podcast possible. Thank you for listening, and we hope you join us next time for the Global Slovakia podcast.